Radio TV phono nut here, and what we have in this badly painted wooden box is a bit of a rarity. In fact, it's something that I've been looking for 20 years or close to it, and one finally showed up on eBay. I ended up paying more for it than I would have really liked to have paid, and I almost didn't buy it with the hopes that they'd relist it for a lower price, but I got to thinking that what if they don't relist it at a lower price? What if they relist it for a higher price? Yes, I've seen that happen. Or they may not even relist it at all. So I jumped on it. You know, it's just one of those situations where sometimes you just have to open your wallet. Alright, what we have here is a talking book record player for the blind. Now what makes this one so special is it's from about 1960 and is spring driven and uses a transistorized battery operated amplifier. It plays records at either 16 2/3 or 33 1/3 RPM and was made by Fanon Electronic Industries. That's the same Fanon who made intercoms and public address equipment. This was made for the Library of Congress Talking Book Program and was issued to Library of Congress Talking Book patrons who, for whatever reason, didn't have electricity. You may be in amazement that by the 1960s that there were people out there who were living without AC power, but yeah, believe it or not, there were still some extreme rural areas in the United States who didn't have AC lines running to their homes. There were also American citizens who, for whatever reason, were living overseas who might not have access to electrical lines. And there were Library of Congress talking book patrons likely living right here in the United States who might have had access to electrical lines but might not have had the financial means to have electricity running to their home. So for such patrons, that's what these machines were made for. And as you might expect, they were made in small quantities. And that brings up another point. If you're looking at this and saying that it looks a lot older than 1960, well, parts of it really are older than 1960. In fact, a lot older. The case here, the wooden case, is a carryover from the late 1940s. At that particular time, this is the type of case that the standard AC operated tube type machines were built in. In fact, the speaker here, I've already taken it out and looked at it, and it's an Operadio branded speaker, which later became Buchanan, the school intercom and PA folks. And the speaker is date coded 1949. So my guess is since these were built in such small quantities, they had to keep costs down, and in order to do that, they used up whatever existing leftover materials they had on hand, as in speakers and cases and whatever. And here we have our headphone jack for private listening. We have an off-on volume control here. The tone arm has the standard plug-in 83D cartridge in it. Although this one doesn't have a flip lever on it, when one side wears out, you simply unplug it and turn it over in its holder. The tone arm has a micro switch in it. You can hear it click there, so when you set it back on the rest, it turns off the amplifier to save the batteries. Back here we have a battery selector switch. This has provisions for 4 D cells here and 4 D cells here. And when one battery bank runs dead, you just simply flip the switch to engage the other battery bank. And you might also be asking yourself, why didn't they just use a DC motor in this? Well, they had DC motors back then, but they weren't quite up to snuff for such usage. And also a DC motor would heavily drain drain a set of batteries, and for patrons who maybe didn't have access to transportation to go obtain new batteries, they didn't need to be running batteries down every 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, because a motor would eat them up in short order. I've already peeked under the hood here. The motor is made by Thorns, as in the Swiss company who made the high-end turntables that audiophiles go goo-goo over. The amplifier uses 4 germanium transistors and is on a hand-wired point-to-point chassis. We'll look at that here shortly. And that's about all I can tell you about it. So let's wind this up and see if it runs. So we'll put our brake on here. And you can see here in this old case here where they notched it out to make room for the crank. And oh yes, something else I forgot to mention. Well, that's good. As you can see, this cabinet has been painted. It was originally brown, looks like. Now, I thought at first that was somebody's slop job. Well, apparently these came painted that way because I was looking on the internet and found another one of these machines that's on display at one of the talking book libraries. And it's painted exactly like this one is. So apparently they just had some old cases and just painted the whole thing, including the latches, and let them go. Alright, we got our brake engaged, so we'll wind this up. Alright, it's running at 33, but I can't get it to go at 16, and that's what the guy who sold it to me said. And that needle, I believe, is shot. He sent me a note with the record player thanking me for purchasing it, and said this was left over from when the retired telephone folks repaired these machines, and the telephone pioneers of America did indeed repair these machines from the 1960s on up until the end of the cassette era. And he said that the funds generated from the sale of this would go towards getting digital talking books and talking book machines in the hands of library patrons. So apparently whoever had this was affiliated with some talking book library, and they found this and decided to sell it and use the funds to help finance the talking book program, which I'm okay with that. Now let's see, they left a battery in here. Let's get it out and see what it is. See what era this battery is from. Okay, this is a Duraswell with a used by date of March 2029, so this is a practically new battery. And as you can see, I have my helper here coming to assist. And here's the speaker, as you can see, Operadio, and date coded the 48th week of 49, and it does not look like a replacement. This wire is rotten and needs to be replaced. And here's the amplifier. You can see all the old style components still there. And here's the schematic diagram, nice and big. And here's the motor, a Thorns number 255. And here we are with the platter removed. Alright, I have a 6-volt battery connected that's used. It's probably lacking some. And the amplifier is passing a signal. So let's put a record on and see what it sounds like.
The weapons would be best for us. They wondered, and at last, thinking it safe. As to that, said the wolf, I'm not going to leave this.
Okay, even though this is a dual-sided needle, I thought this was the kind of holder that you could reverse the needle or reverse the cartridge and plug it back in, but that's not the case. So let me go try to find something with a good point on it that I could insert in here, and maybe it'll play the record without sliding across it. Okay, I found another cartridge. Let's see if it'll do any better.
More Tales from Grimm. Translated by Wanda Gog. Copyright 1947 by the estate of Wanda Gog. Recorded in 5 records for the Library of Congress in the studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, 1960. Intended solely for the use of the blind with the kind permission of the publishers, Coward McCann Incorporated. Read by Bert Blackwell. Table of Contents. The Seven Swabians, page 1. The Wolf and the Fox, page 1.
Well, of course, it doesn't have the volume level or the tonal quality of the big tube models, but...
Thorn Rose, The Sleeping Beauty, page 2.
But it does work.
Page 2. The Little Shepherd Boy, page 2. Page 4. The Star Dollars, page 4. His wife were always lucky after that, and they never forgot the 2 little elves who had helped them in their time of need. The end. Recorded in the Talking Book Studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, Louisville, Kentucky, May 1960. Read by Bert Blackwell.
And here's a 16 RPM record, but we can't shift it to the 16 RPM speed, so that's an issue. And the 33 sounded like it was running a bit fast, so we're going to have to look into this motor. And we'll check the amplifier too and make sure it's up to snuff, but at least we know it's passing a signal. That tells us that all the transistors are likely okay. And here's why we're not shifting into the 16 RPM speed. Here's the lever that turns it, but as you can see, this shaft here is not moving. It's stuck. Probably because of dried out grease, so we're probably going to have to take all this off and use some heat to get that freed up and then re-oil it. Okay, this is stuck and I don't want to try to force it, and I'm not really too familiar with working on these spring-driven motors, so I'm just going to have to evaluate this situation and see where it takes me.
The Queen Bee.
Well, now old Bert sounds like he's really running fast.
Page 7. The Earth Gnome.
Well, it looks like this thing's running at 45 RPM, so this is something that obviously somebody twiddled with to make it play 45s, and I need to find the speed adjustment or do a little looking around and figure out how to get the speed back right. Okay, this looks like just a retainer screw of some sort. It doesn't appear to be any kind of adjustment. But like I said, I'm kind of rusty on these types of motors, and I'm not sure yet how to adjust the speed on these, but apparently somebody knew because they tweaked with it to get it to run at 45 RPM. Well, I think my old yellow meter's done had it, measuring across this battery, and you can see it's all over the place. This is the meter. It got so I had to stare at it a certain way, or else it looked like the whole display was energized. And now it's just giving me incorrect readings all over the place. I think I'm going to have to break down and order me another meter. I also noticed when playing a music record that the output did seem distorted. Now, that could be due to a faulty germanium transistor, especially one of the output transistors in the push-pull configuration. We'll check all that too. Now, these little bumpers on the speaker grill, those are to hold the platter in place when the lid is closed. However, there's nothing to hold the tone arm in place when the lid's down, so I have it tied in place. As far as battery-operated talking book record players, I don't know how many there were, but going from the well, I'll back up and say they published a book back in the 80s about the talking book program, which I have in talking book format, and they go into detail about all of the models of machines that were made, and they mention this machine, and after this machine, the next battery-operated record player that they mentioned was the model B71. I actually saw one of those on eBay one time, but it was ridiculously overpriced, and then it just disappeared. It used a 4-speed BSR mechanism that played 8, 16, 33, and 45, and had a self-contained rechargeable battery pack, and I believe the machine would run off of AC power too. And I also think there was a solar cell battery charger option for patrons who didn't have access to electricity. And after that machine, there was the B79. I've never seen a picture of that one, so I can't tell you what it uses as far as a drive mechanism. And then after that, there was the cassette machines that were battery operated, and the next battery operated phonograph was the CT1, which was a combination cassette machine and record player in one unit, and I have that model, but the battery pack is missing from it, and it's a proprietary pack that was only used in that machine, so I'm sure there's no more left, and if there are any left, they're dead from old age, so there you go. Okay, I just ordered me a new meter from Mauser Electronics to replace this yellow thing here. And I think with shipping and tax and everything, it was $43 and something, probably about what I paid for this one, and has similar features to this one, so it should suit my needs fine. And here's the kicker. The only shipping options they offered was either UPS or FedEx 2- and 3-day, and actually UPS 2-day was cheaper than UPS 3-day, so it was a no-brainer which one I went with. And I've just got a sneaky suspicion that that meter will actually be here when it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, I don't think that would be the case had it been shipped by the United States Postal Service. In fact, everything I'm ordering that's delivered by them here lately, even the priority mail stuff, is showing up way late. In fact, I've got a package right now hung up in Louisville, Kentucky, and I just saw an article on the internet where that sort facility is pretty much as a hellhole right now, with backlogs and stuff piling up, and they interviewed people that's throwing a fit, and I don't blame them, because they paid to have stuff shipped priority to get it in time by Christmas, and here it is running late, and it's not doing them any good when the package is stuck in Louisville, Kentucky. It's like somebody said on a forum that I was reading, these clowns that are working in the back rooms of the post office wouldn't last a day at FedEx or UPS. Okay, I bet you this is the adjustment screw right here to adjust the speed. And this lever here that changes it from 16 to 33, it looks like it attaches to the governor here some way. So I think all this is just going to be a matter of just cleaning and lubricating, and it ought to be good to go again. Alright, turning the screw clockwise did indeed slow it down, so we're going to keep turning it. I really need a stroboscope disc to do this accurately, and we'll probably do that before we're done with this, but right now we'll just try to dial it in the best we can. Now it's running too fast. Or correction, it's running much too fast. Okay, here's the motor out of the record player. I took it out so I could see it better, and there's no way I'm going to try to dismantle this box here that contains the spring. All I'm going to do is try to get this governor working right and get this speed control shaft to move, and then maybe put a few drops of oil down on the center motor shaft and put a little grease on these gears, and that's all we're going to do to it. Okay, here's the trouble. I do believe this lever here is supposed to move when you tighten this screw in, and that's what adjusts the governor to control the speed. Well, that lever is stuck. That lever also moves when you shift the 16 and 33 RPM lever, but like I said, that lever is stuck and will not move under any circumstances, so I'm going to go and crank up the soldering iron or something or another. The soldering iron may not be hot enough, and we're going to try to heat this up and get this to move. and then we'll re-lubricate it. And looking at the amplifier, this uses a couple of 2N 406s, one for the audio amp and driver tube, and then a couple of 2N 408s for the audio output transistors. All germanium devices, and they all cross-reference to NTE 102A. And you can see here on the chassis where they penciled in the transistor numbers 406, 406, 408, and 408 back there, so this was definitely a hand-built unit. We have these three capacitors here that I believe are Sprague. Now, if my memory is correct, the ones with yellow printing are just simply paper capacitors inside of a plastic case, and the ones with red printing are diaphragm capacitors. Now, the diaphragm capacitors usually hold up. The paper ones not so much, but at least with these there's no high voltage involved, so no danger of anything blowing up. In fact, the voltage is so low these might still work satisfactorily, but we'll check all that out later. I want to get the mechanism to run right first. And there's our micro switch that kills the amplifier when the tone arm is placed on the rest. That's so you won't accidentally run the battery dead. Put the tone arm on the rest, it kills the juice to the amplifier. Lots of 5% resistors in this unit. That's because much of this solid state stuff requires parts of closer tolerance than the old tube stuff that could get by with 10, 20, 50% or more. And we have 4 electrolytic capacitors here, mainly used as bypass use. I'll ESR test them and see what kind of shape they're in, but I want to try to leave this one as original as possible, just change just enough to get it working somewhat as good as it was ever able to work, and then call it a day. Here's another wind-up phonograph, a Sears Silvertone from the early 50s, although this one's not made for talking book use. It's a standard 78 RPM model, but it has the fast and slow speed adjustment. And we'll open it up and see how this governor works. Okay, you really can't see it that well, but basically all this does is when I move the lever to slow, it just applies a pressure pad to this spinning disc that's on the gut part of the governor here, and that slows the governor down, which in turn slows the speed that the turntable rotates down, and whenever I relieve the pressure from the pressure pad, it speeds up. And it appears that they're doing basically the same thing on the Thorns mechanism. Found a date stamp inside of this machine, or at least I think it's a date stamp, 5311, 11th week of 1953, and that makes sense. Now, by 1953, microgroove LPs and 45s were well established, but most popular tunes and some that weren't so popular were still available on 78 RPM records, and Sears had a big following among rural customers. So like I've already said about the talking book machine, there were still plenty of rural areas in the early 50s that didn't have electricity, so they needed something to play records on. So here you go, a wind-up portable. And it was also desirable to have a portable phonograph to take with you to the beach or on a picnic or whatever, where electricity was not always available. So once again, here you go. Now I've got an older Sears wind-up unit from about 47 or 48 that uses a battery-operated tube amplifier, which we'll look into that one of these days. Alright, now let's get back on the talking book machine. Okay, by applying heat, I got this lever to move, And I suspect the way we have to adjust this is so the pressure pad here applies enough pressure to the spinning disc here as part of the governor to slow it down to 33, and then whenever we flip the lever to 16, it applies even more pressure to the spinning disc to slow it down even further down to 16 RPM. And I imagine adjusting that is going to be a trial and error, royal pain in the butt, but something we're going to have to do. But we're going to give it our best shot, because I would like to get this thing back to working properly if I can. I wonder how hard it would be to get this down to 8 1/3 RPM, although I don't think there was ever any wind-up models made that would go down that low. If, like I said earlier, I think the only non-electric model that would do 8 1/3 RPM was a solid-state model with a built-in rechargeable battery pack that was running a DC motor, and they were using a modified 4-speed BSR single-play mechanism that would play records at either 8, 16, 33, or 45, and I think there was a variable pitch control, probably used to, if nothing else, compensate for batteries that were getting weak. Alright, I can tell that it's working, and if I apply too much pressure from the pressure pad, it stops the wheel completely. So yeah, we're going to have to, once I get this thing cleaned up and lubricated a little better, we're just going to have to put it all back in the machine and adjust it for the proper speeds. And like I said, it's probably going to be a bit of a trial and error pain in the butt. Okay, by applying a lot of heat and oil and what have you, I got that lever that shaft to break loose so I could move the lever that controls the governor here. Probably the correct thing to do would be to tear this motor completely down, clean it up, and re-lubricate it, but this thing is running relatively quiet as it is, and I'm not going to take any chances of making things worse. So it's not like this is something I'm going to be using all the time. It's just something I can own and say that it runs. And I was looking at some videos on repairing these spring wound motors, and they say you're supposed to thoroughly oil the felt pad that makes contact with this spinning disc on the governor here. So I did that. Now I think it's time to put the motor back in the machine, and the fun part is going to be aligning everything, so when the lever points to 33, it's actually running at 33, and when it points to 16, it's actually running at 16 RPM. But yeah, this thing's barely making any noise at all, so I think we need to just leave it alone. If I take it apart and start messing with it, it might end up making noise when we put it back together. So it's like they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, we have the motor reinstalled and it's running quietly, but we do need to adjust this because see, when I move it to 16 it just stops, which means there's too much pressure being applied to the governor, so we need to adjust that screw under there to kind of back off on that a little bit. Okay, I adjusted the screw. There's 33 and there's 16, and it has a definite stop on 16 and 33. I think we're going to have to adjust this lever here, bend it slightly, because when it's on 33 you can sometimes hear the platter just barely scraping the lever. Something else I found in the shop while looking for something was this little record player here that's a bit of a rarity that you'll see in a future video. This is an early transistorized, battery-operated 3-speed record player in AM radio combination, probably from about 57 or so. Plays 33, 45, and 78. Has a small little turntable platter with the mouse fur covering on it. That's something that pretty much went away with the tube era, but any solid state phonograph you find with this mouse fur covering on the platter is going to be a rare one. Here's our AM radio dial, our phono radio switch, controls for all phone volume and tone. Here's the underside. Little DC motor. I have no idea who made the mechanism. We got two circuit boards here. One's the receiver chassis and the other one is the amplifier chassis. As you can see, it uses the old style transistors with a little crimped nipple on top. So it looks like we have a converter transistor, a first IF, a second IF, a detector diode, an audio amplifier, a driver, and two output transistors in push-pull configuration. Here's the case. It's really designed like a typical AC-operated kiddie record player from the era. And there's the brand, the Voyager All-Transistor by Transair. So yeah, you'll get to see that in a future video. And yeah, I try sometimes to feature something a little bit different and off the wall instead of just video after video of just another 5-tube radio chassis or just another classroom record player or a one-tube Wonder Kiddie phonograph. I think it's good to add something a little bit different from time to time, and that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this talking book machine video right now. It's not every day that you see a wind-up record player for the visually impaired. And I've got a little bit of sad news to report. I'm sure many of you knew Chris Cuff. He has had a YouTube channel, although he had not posted anything on it in quite some time, probably a year or more. And he was an avid collector of vintage electronics, radios, record players, and other such things. And he was an active member in the vintage electronics groups on Facebook. Well, I'm sad to report that he lost the battle with cancer, I believe on December the 9th. And he's somebody that will surely be missed in the vintage electronics community, and his knowledge and wisdom helped a lot of people out over the years, including myself. And speaking for me personally, I'll miss seeing his postings on Facebook, and my thoughts and prayers go out to his family. Okay, I've got the drive mechanism back in, and I've been playing with it, trying to get it adjusted right. I still don't have it 100% perfect, but seeing as how this is something I'm probably not going to ever use again, just except for demonstration purposes, I've probably got it as good as I'm going to get it. This is a 16 RPM record.
Captains Courageous by Rudyard Kipling. Copyright 1896-1897 by Rudyard Kipling. Recorded in 5 records in the Library of Congress in the studios of the American Printing House of the Blind, 1964. Intended solely for the use of the blind.
I'm detecting a little bit of wavering here, there, and yonder. Technically, this mechanism needs to be completely taken apart and cleaned and re-lubricated, but I'm not going to do all that right now.
This book tells the story of a spoiled, rich American boy who becomes a man through working on a Gloucester fishing schooner. Chapter 1. The Weather, Chapter 1.
Oh, that's good.
Jenny boy is the biggest nuisance aboard, said a man in a frieze overcoat, shutting the door with a bang. He isn't wanted here. He's too fresh. A white hair.
I really can't seem to get it to line up right where it runs at 16 when the lever is pointed to 16 and 33 when it's pointed to 33. You just have to move the lever until the pitch sounds right. This is one area where it was advantageous where when they came up with suitable DC motors that could be controlled by an electronic speed control circuit, and then you didn't have any of these issues like what we have with these mechanical systems. This is a 33 RPM record.
More Tales from Grimm. Translated by Wanda Gog. Copyright 1947 by the estate of Wanda Gog. Recorded in 5 records for the Library of Congress in the studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, 1960. Intended solely for the use of the blind with the kind permission of the publishers, Coward McCann Incorporated. Read by Bert Blackmore. Table of Contents. The 7 Swabians.
And the way it is now, I can run it up to 45 RPM, and it actually does better at that speed because there's less pressure being applied to that wheel on the governor, so it can't get it up to 78, but we can definitely do 45s on it. So yeah, on these types of motors, there's no definite click here for 33 and click to the other side for 16. You just have to move the lever until the pitch sounds right. Move it this way for 33 and the other way for 16. Now we're going to look into this amplifier a little bit, although I'm not going to go hog wild with it, but I will spray the pot, the volume pot. They don't give you a tone pot on this one. And I'll ESR test the electrolytics, and probably about as far as I'm going to go with it. Okay, I checked the ESR on all of these capacitors. They're pretty good. Not as good as a new capacitor, but not bad enough that I'm going to jump in here and start changing all of these. And these capacitors here, there's virtually no voltage involved, not enough to amount to anything, so I'm not going to worry about them either. Like I said, I'm about to the point with this where this is more or less just for demonstration only. I do indeed have electric service at this house, and hopefully I'll continue to have electric service at this house. And you know, with that being the case, I've got electric talking book machines that sound much better than this thing does that we can use. And if not, I've got my new digital talking book machine and a cassette machine that both have built-in battery packs. And if it gets to the point where I somehow don't have electric service at this house, then I'll just rig up a solar cell charger or some other means to recharge the batteries in them. Now I'd like to find one of the newer battery-operated record players like the B71 or the B79 that I mentioned earlier, but who knows, maybe one will show up on Evil Bay for a price I can deal with.
Master, man. Man, master, said he. You remember, Dan Troop, what I said on the We're Here? Well, I won't go so far as to deny that it do look like it as things stand at present, said Dan. She was an able packet, and one way and another I owe her a heap. Her and Dad. Me too, quoth Harvey Chain. The end. Captain's Courageous by Rudyard Kipling. Recorded in the Talking Book Studios of the American Printing House for the Blind, Louisville, Kentucky, May 1964. Read by William Gladden.
Okay, that's it. It's back together and ready to go in my stash.